The Giardinelli line of trumpet mouthpieces are iconic. They have a really cool look and feel to them. I showcased one in a video where I described how to get rid of tarnish using some fun chemistry magic. You can find the link up in the card. But today, we're looking at that and two other Giardinelli mouthpieces and seeing how they stack up. Stay tuned. Hey there everybody, this is your host Sam here from the Samuel Plays Brass channel. Thanks for tuning in and I hope you're all doing well. Once again, we are talking about three different Giardinelli trumpet mouthpieces today, and so I will turn it over to Sam from the past to introduce them to you with a quick original composition.
This is the Giardinelli 1S, this is the Giardinelli 3C, this is the Giardinelli 7C, and this is Three-Way Stop by Sam Morozov. Enjoy.
And before we delve into each of these mouthpieces and learn a little bit about them, I'd like to ask you to please check that you're actually subscribed to the Samuel Plays Brass channel. You'll notice that a lot of my viewers who often watch my videos actually are not subscribed to the channel, and that's a shame because they're not staying up to date with new stuff that I put out. So hey, if that's you, no pressure, but feel free to join the club below. The 1S, my personal favorite of the three and the only one that I still actually have my hands on. It says Giardinelli New York, and on the opposing side, the size 1S in the smallest font out of the three. The S cup is pretty similar to a Bach E cup, maybe even a touch smaller, but definitely more V-shaped. It's got, I would say, the most exciting or lively sound of the three, and it's great for things like vintage jazz or anything really, really bright. With that said, it projects well but isn't super laser direct like a modern lead trumpet mouthpiece. So I'd say it was maybe designed as a pops mouthpiece in the symphony when you're playing, you know, some of the upper register stuff in the orchestra. I said the same sort of thing of the Bach 1E. You can check out that video in the card. It's a similar sort of mouthpiece. And this seems to be a common theme of mouthpieces with very wide inner diameters but very shallow cups, that they might do well overpowering an 80-person orchestra rather than a 17-person big band where you're expected to play at the wall rather than into the stage, I suppose. It's got a very comfy feel to it, but it's incredibly different from the others in terms of feel, of course, just because of how different the size is. It's got ridiculously easy shakes and vibrato, which I really like for things like vintage jazz, and I would say it's the easiest to hit the low notes on out of the three mouthpieces, but it's a little bit tough to give them that full and rich sound that I desire from them and unfortunately have a little bit of trouble producing in general. Giardinelli is responsible for probably my favorite take on the 3C size. This is a fairly modern mouthpiece. It says Giardinelli 3C in the largest font out of the three, and I got it all but a few years ago in Seattle when we were taking a trip up to there, and I just instantly fell in love with it and had to have it since it was pretty cheap as well. The sound is really, really versatile, but I found immediately that it had the big band sound. With that said, it works for plenty else. I would say it has the best blend of a dark and rich sound versus a whispery subtone sort of sound out of the three mouthpieces. It definitely is good for Chet Baker and jazz combo type stuff. It's also got a very comfy feel for me personally. It's almost like a 3C rim, a very forgiving one, on something more like a 1.5 or 2C cup. So even though it has that slightly wider inner diameter and claims to be about a Bach 1.5C in terms of width, the actual contour of the rim might feel familiar for 3C players. And this is the one that has probably the most pleasant sounding low notes, but unfortunately because the inner diameter is a little bit narrower than the 1S, I was having a little bit more trouble reaching the low notes on it, and that is ultimately mostly the reason I parted with it. And now the poor abandoned trumpet mouthpiece that I found in a euphonium locker at my high school. The Giardinelli 7C is a little bit older than the 3C that I showed. It's got Giardinelli 7C on it in sort of a medium-sized font in between the other two, and it should, in theory, be familiar territory for anybody who plays a Bach 7C up through a 3C. It claims to have about a Bach 3 diameter, but it's definitely a proper C cup, not like most Bach 7Cs, which are actually quite a bit deeper than the typical C, and ironically, this can go either way. It can either be a fairly good mouthpiece for larger players, 3C players, but 7C players might actually have a little bit of trouble on this mouthpiece and find it too tight because of that slightly shallower cup than what they might be used to. So it's interesting how that could go in any direction, really. It's good for a sort of a smoky Chet Baker sound if you're okay with it being thinner rather than darker. It's not as expansive of a sound, but it's got a nice whisper tone to it. The sound is otherwise very similar to the 3C, but I would say it's a little bit easier to make strident than the 3C, a little bit more like the 1S in that regard. But then again, it might still be the most approachable to the average young player just because the cup volume is a little bit smaller than that of the 3C. I've mentioned my fair share of smokiness in this video, and I think each of these three mouthpieces are quite good for a smoky sound. I'd like to discuss one reason why that might be. Just by looking at the cups and sort of feeling around on these mouthpieces, I noticed they have fairly sloped entrances into the throat. It's not just like cup and then throat. It's like cup, a little bit of incline, and then into the throat. It's almost like a very, very small double cup. I've played on one true double cup mouthpiece, and it's a Parduba 8, and I had a lot of trouble playing it. Everything sounded fluffy and fuzzy to the point that it was not really a good thing. I didn't sound like Chet Baker anymore, I sounded like an amateur, and I couldn't get the sound to focus in enough. And I think the Giardinelli might have just added the absolute slightest dose of that into their secret formula to where you're not getting too tubby or fuzzy of a sound, but you can sort of fluff it up if you desire. Just an interesting little observation I found. So I'm sure you probably want to hear these mouthpieces individually in context and sort of pick out which one you like best in which scenario. That's what we're going to do now. Unfortunately, these playing clips are from before I had hair on my face and plants on my desk, but hopefully they're not too shabby. Unfortunately, I can't get any new footage because, like I said, I only have the 1S on my hands now. But in any case, we're going to start off with an excerpt that really demonstrates the jazz and big band side of these mouthpieces. We'll transition to one that's a little bit smokier, as I've been saying. And, I hope you'll pardon me, I probably wouldn't let a clip like this slide in present day, but I took just one rough take of a double C on each because I had a headache and was in no mood to play high notes. I think each of these mouthpieces are unique in their own ways and have their own merits and uses, so I'd like to go over where I would use each of these three if given the choice. Firstly, the 1S, like I said, would be really good for a symphony orchestra that's playing lead-heavy popular music or film soundtracks or anything like that. It's got a really great sound for that. I probably would opt for it for really heavy lead work in a jazz band or a commercial sort of studio setting, but I would mostly reserve it for older swing band type music. Even though it's a fairly cavernous inner diameter, it definitely has more of an old-timey sound. Whereas the 3C I would be using for modern big band stuff. It's really good at channeling its inner Gordon Goodwin, especially if I'm on any of the lower trumpet chairs, sit in a jazz band. Anyway, if I was on any part other than lead trumpet, I would especially choose the 3C, but even on lead in a modern setting, I think I might still go with it. It's definitely my choice for all-around classical wind band or orchestra playing, particularly if I'm on principal part there, or most of the solo repertoire. The 7C, on the other hand, I might use in a jazz combo, especially for playing ballads, even if it's not my preferred size, just because it has that smoky and thin, whispery sound, and potentially march music because it has nice and firm articulations. The trouble is I do find it a little bit restrictive on both extremes of my range, and while the low notes aren't usually troublesome for march music, the high notes, I don't know. So I hope you enjoyed that little deep dive. I know I've enjoyed playing all three of these mouthpieces, even if it is rather in the distant past. And I hope you've enjoyed as well. If you have, make sure to leave a like and a comment down below. Let me know if you want to see more Mouthpiece Spotlights, because I think we've got enough to keep me busy for a while. Once again, please make sure to check that you're subscribed to the Samuel Plays Brass channel. It's a small gesture with a huge impact, and it keeps me making videos like this for you. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Sam, reviewing the Giardinelli 1S, 3C, and 7C. And until next time, we'll see you on the flip side.